Thank you, students, youth, for sharing your journeys. Let's give them another round of applause, shall we? So amazing to see the resilience in their lives. Yes. Well, at this time, it's my honor to introduce to you another individual who is fairly new to the London area. Actually, comes to us all the way from St. Thomas. And yes, right? Some of you have heard of St. Thomas? Apparently, they've got 25% more life. Don't buy it. It's a sales gimmick. But this gentleman happens to be the pastor of a church there called Faith Baptist Church. And he is one that, as I've gotten to know him, I get very excited about him. One of the reasons is because he's very passionate about the community that he lives in. I would say he probably spends 90% of his time in community with people and maybe 10% in his church office. Very much reaching out, loving those around him, and being tangibly involved, whether it be volunteering at high school rugby, might be a giveaway from the country he's also from, but also involved in the YMCA. The other thing that I get excited about him is his accent. It's just kind of fun. And I will say, if we need an interpreter, we're happy to put on some special earphones for interpreting in English. Because would you please welcome with me Steve McCready, all the way from North Ireland. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, James. You make me sound important, and I'm really not. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. It's true, I am from Northern Ireland, but the good news, back in May, they allowed me to become a Canadian. What about that? So now I just find that I just apologize for everything all the time. So I'm sorry in advance if I go over time, but I'm Irish when I preach. Okay, that's kind of how this goes. Delighted to be here. I know I'm not the only person in the room who's got some sweaty eyes after those stories. And maybe your heart is just beating a little faster and you're struggling to breathe. That's certainly how I was feeling as I was hearing from those amazing young men and women. And I was just excited, like you, I guess, to have the privilege to be here to learn about Youth for Christ and support this great organization. I grew up, as you can tell from my accent, not in Newfoundland, but in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And I grew up in the middle of the Irish Troubles, and some of you are too young to know what they were, and many of you will remember the bombs and bullets of Belfast. And I grew up in a security home family, and what that meant was my father served in the security forces. I grew up in a home with bulletproof glass, and my job as a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old and as a young boy was to actually check under the family car for bombs every day. And so that's an interesting childhood, wouldn't you agree? One of the results of life growing up in Northern Ireland in the middle of the Troubles is there was no youth work. It was just too risky. Churches couldn't do it, and community organizations couldn't do it. But a group of passionate leaders from a little organization called Youth for Christ felt really called, despite all the struggles and challenges of our country, to start a program in Belfast on Saturday nights for boys and girls from across the community. Visionary man by the name of John Duncan started a program called Manifest, calling boys and girls together to come into the center of the city despite the bombs and the soldiers on every street corner, and to learn and discover about Jesus. And it's actually through that ministry that I became a Christian when I was 18 years of age. And so Youth for Christ is very dear to my heart. But here's something that I learned back in those early days. That's actually the DNA of this organization. They're a bunch of risk takers who are willing to go to places that some of the rest of us, well, we just know that we couldn't get there. And that's so true of YFCLondon as well. And we get that, right, as we hear the stories. Here's an amazing group of men and women, of leaders who are willing to take risks and go to places that we just wouldn't be comfortable. And I'm so thankful that you do. So thank you for that. And back in June, I happened to be the guest speaker at the National Conference for Youth for Christ, Youth Unlimited in Quebec City. So I had the opportunity to go up there and spend a week with all of the staff from across this amazing nation, hearing their stories. And on one particular day, I was sitting around a table with some of the youth workers from YFC, and we were having dialogue about some of the challenges facing the church and our ministry at this time in history. And as I listened to these amazing youth workers talk about the kids that they work with, about the conversations that they're having, about the struggles of trying to walk through areas of sexuality and identity and self-harm and you name it. Here's what I was aware of very quickly as a 40-year-old. Now, I know you couldn't tell that I'm 40, but I also turned 40 in the summer. Here's what I was very aware of sitting around that table. I am so out of my depth when it comes to trying to connect with the next generation. It's so far beyond me now, and yet in that moment, I was just so thankful that God has raised up an entire group of experts in the family of Youth for Christ, youth workers and youth leaders and directors who know how to have those conversations and who know how to minister the gospel in ways that I never could. Can I tell you one more Youth for Christ story? This is a really good one. A number of years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to Lebanon to work with YFC in Lebanon. We were speaking at a youth retreat, a youth camp in Beirut. Now, if you don't know about Beirut, it makes Belfast and the Troubles look like Elmer on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, it's just something else. AK-47s everywhere, and there was this pioneering group of youth workers with Youth for Christ who started a program reaching out to young Muslims and young Christians and bringing them together to try to teach them about Christ. And so my job was to come and be the speaker at this camp. The camp, very different than anything you would experience here, as you would imagine, in North America. But one of the evenings at the camp, it was time for the game. Now, in Lebanon, they have rolling blackouts because they can't keep the electric turned on. And so the lights are all out. This is pitch black. We're out in the middle of the mountains at this camp, and it's so dark. And everyone got really excited as the leaders announced the game. And the game was called Bag and Tag. And so what would happen is that leaders would be driving around the campus in these big old American cars. And if they catch a camper, they put a black bag over their head and toss them into the trunk of the car. They would then drive them to like the toilet block, and they would take them in there and they would stack tires over them so that they're standing restrained underneath these tires. Then someone would come in with a chainsaw and start bashing the chainsaw off the metal pipes. I know this is true because it happened to my wife. And they're bashing the chainsaw off, and the sparks are flying everywhere. And the idea was to really intimidate the young person so they would give up the code word, and then they would give away, and the leaders would win. Now, that would not happen at a camp in North America, agreed? But here's the thing that I learned in that moment is ministry to young people is highly contextualized. Right? Like, you have to highly contextualize. And those boys and girls, they were having the time of their life in these pretend kind of torture, mock-up kind of Middle Eastern experiences. Listen, you've seen that tonight. Good ministry is highly contextualized. It meets people where they are at, using language that they understand. And whether that's in art or education or basketball, I think we could all agree Youth for Christ London are knocking that out of the park. Aren't they knocking it out of the park? Highly contextualized ministry. Now, let me wrap up by saying I think the greatest thing about Youth for Christ is this. They give you and I, regular Joes who just can't do what they do. I mean, they are like the Navy SEALs of Christian ministry, but they allow us to be a part of it. And I'm so, so thankful for that. And I know you've been so generous already tonight, but my job is just to give you one more nudge or one more push or to give one more ask to say, let's do this, guys. Let's get behind YFC London. They're doing some amazing things, things that are beyond us, things that we can't do, but they're inviting us to be a part of it. That's a privilege. That's an absolute honor. You know, when Jesus sent out the 12, He gave them a great word. He says, go and proclaim the good news of God. The kingdom of God is near. He says, raise the dead, cast out demons, cleanse the lepers, heal the sick. He says, freely you have given, now freely give. Freely you have given. We have received much. Let's give much. Let's make a huge difference. Now, on your tables, there's a brown envelope. I invite you to take that, open it, pass around the response cards. I'd love you tonight to pray about, think about quickly respond, and let's be super generous. It's at the very heart of the gospel. It's at the very heart of the commission to freely give as we have given, and let's make a difference. I know many of you already are sponsors, you're monthly donors. Whenever I worked for Youth for Christ, I was so thankful for the monthly donors I had. But you know what the annual banquet was a good opportunity to do? Increase that amount. Because even that little bit, incrementally, as everybody increases their amount, makes a huge difference. So let's be super generous. Freely, we've been given much. Let's freely give much and respond tonight. Now, I've been told that I have to say this because this is something that gets said every year, but apparently we need some check writing music. So there's going to be some check writing music on. Thanks for listening so well. Let's be generous. Let's make a difference. And let's rock this city with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you.